My wife's lawyer served me divorce papers at my office on a Tuesday afternoon, right after my 2 p.m. board call ended. He walked past my receptionist like he owned the place. Mid-40s, tailored charcoal suit, leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. He said my name out loud in front of my staff. Then he handed me a thick stack of documents and smiled like the outcome was already decided. He wanted everything. The house, my company, primary custody of my children. What he didn't know was that I'd been carrying an envelope in my desk drawer for months. And by the time that envelope made it into the courtroom, my wife's case and her entire family's reputation will be destroyed beyond repair. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 46 years old. For the last 19 years, I've run Mercer Industrial Logistics, mid-sized, privately held, headquartered in Chicago. We manage freight routing and supply chain security for manufacturers who can't afford mistakes. Annual revenue last year was $3.6 million. I built it from nothing. 15 years ago, I married Claire Whitman. She was elegant, educated, came from a family people recognized in this city. Her father, Richard Whitman, had spent 3 decades bouncing between political appointments and regulatory boards. Her mother chaired a philanthropic foundation that mostly funded galas with their last name printed on banners. Claire liked to say she was different from them. I believed her. We met at a charity auction in 2009. I bought a weekend getaway package I couldn't afford. She laughed at my joke about overpaying and said, "At least it's for a good cause." That sentence should have told me everything. We married 18 months later. The wedding cost $92,000. I paid every dollar. For the first few years, things worked because I worked. 70-hour weeks, overnight client calls, missed dinners, missed vacations. Claire said she understood. When our son, Evan, was born in 2013, I took exactly 5 days off. When our daughter, Lily, arrived 2 years later, I took 4. Not because I didn't care, because I did. By 2018, Mercer Industrial had contracts with 3 Fortune 500 suppliers. We bought a 4-bedroom home in Lakeview, $1.1 million. Claire redecorated twice in the first year. Italian furniture, custom shelving, a kitchen renovation she described as non-negotiable. I didn't argue. I thought that was what providing looked like. What I didn't notice at first was how Claire's language started changing. She stopped saying we and started saying, "I deserve." By the time I noticed, it was already too late. The man who served me that Tuesday was named Andrew Kellerman, senior partner, family law, known for aggressive custody battles and scorched earth asset division. He introduced himself loudly, shook my hand too hard, and said, "Mr. Mercer, I'm sure this comes as a surprise, but my client believes it's time to formalize reality." Reality. That word stayed with me. He didn't ask to sit down, didn't lower his voice. He wanted my employees to hear. I flipped through the papers slowly. Claire was asking for full ownership of the marital home, 65% of my business valuation, sole physical custody of both children, supervised visitation for me, $11,000 a month in spousal support. The justification was outlined in 14 pages. Emotionally unavailable, work-obsessed, controlling tendencies, excessive interest in surveillance and security. That last one almost made me smile. Kellerman leaned forward. "These are strong filings. Daniel, judges don't look kindly on men who prioritize money over their families. I closed the folder. Then I opened my desk drawer. Inside was a plain manila envelope. No label. No markings. I handed it to him. "Before you file anything else," I said, "you should look through that." He frowned. "What is this?" "Information," I said, "about your client and her family." Kellerman hesitated, then slid the envelope into his briefcase like it was nothing. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and said, "We'll be in touch." He had no idea that envelope was already too late. I didn't start collecting information out of anger. I started because something didn't add up. 6 months earlier, Claire had told me she needed space. Not separation, just space. She started staying late at her parents' house, taking phone calls in the car, closing her laptop when I walked into the room. 15 years of marriage teaches you patterns. Military intelligence teaches you when patterns break. I didn't confront her. I observed. What I found wasn't just an affair or hidden accounts. It was a family that had been hiding things for decades and assumed no one would ever look closely enough to see them. They were wrong. And by the time Claire's lawyer opened the envelope in his office that evening, the case he thought he was filing was already dead. I didn't tell anyone about the envelope. Not my lawyer, not my staff, not even my brother, who had been my closest friend since childhood. People make mistakes when they feel justified. They make bigger ones when they feel untouchable. Claire felt both. The first sign came 3 days after Kellerman served me. She didn't call, didn't text. Instead, she changed the locks on the house while Evan and Lily were at school. I found out when my key didn't work at 6:18 p.m. after a 14-hour day I hadn't planned on extending. I stood on my own front porch, staring at a brushed steel lock I'd paid for, on a door I'd installed, to a house the court hadn't touched yet. Claire opened the door just wide enough to block me with her body. "You can't come in," she said. "No anger, no sadness, just procedure." "I live here," I replied. She shook her head. "My lawyer advised me not to allow unsupervised contact until the court sets terms." That word again. Advised. Evan and Lily were standing behind her, half hidden by the staircase. They didn't understand what was happening. They just knew something was wrong. I bent down slightly so they could see my face. "I'll see you soon," I said. "Okay." Evan nodded, confused. Lily didn't. Claire closed the door without another word. I sat in my car for 12 minutes before turning the engine on. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like someone under attack. Claire's filings weren't emotional. They were engineered. Every accusation came with language that sounded reasonable to people who didn't know me. Emotionally unavailable instead of worked long hours. Controlling instead of detail-oriented. Obsessive interest in security instead of runs a security-focused business. She wasn't improvising. Someone helped her write that. I knew exactly who. The Whitman family had been building narratives longer than I'd been alive. Their power wasn't money. It was credibility. Judges, regulators, boards, donors. They knew how to make things sound concerned instead of accusatory. That's how reputations get quietly buried. The next escalation came through my company. 2 weeks after I was served, Mercer Industrial received a notice of inquiry from the state. Anonymous complaint. Allegations of improper client surveillance. misuse of proprietary data, potential ethical violations. None of it was true, but truth isn't the point when regulators come knocking. Time is. Every audit freezes growth. Every investigation scares clients. Exactly what Claire's filing said I was obsessed with. Coincidence doesn't repeat itself that cleanly. I didn't react. I documented. Here's what people don't understand about preparation. It doesn't start when you know you're in trouble. It starts when something feels off, and you decide not to ignore it. Months before the divorce papers, I'd noticed financial inconsistencies. Small at first, transfers that didn't match expenses. Accounts Claire handled that suddenly stopped reconciling. She blamed accounting software. I didn't argue. I copied records. What I found later was systematic. Claire had been moving money for over a year. Not hiding it. Positioning it. Separate accounts. Trust-linked entities tied to her parents' foundation. Loans secured against marital assets I'd never authorized. That envelope I gave Kellerman, it wasn't revenge. It was documentation. The first meeting with my attorney happened the morning after the lock change. Her name was Mary Ann Holt. Family law, 25 years. Known for being quiet. Known for winning cases people assumed were unwinnable. She didn't react when I told her Claire wanted full custody. Didn't raise an eyebrow at supervised visitation. She asked one question. Do you have proof she's lying? I slid a flash drive across her desk. She didn't plug it in immediately. She looked at me instead. How long have you been collecting this? Longer than she's been planning this, I said. That was the first time Mary Ann smiled. Clay's strategy depended on one assumption. That I'd panic. That I'd explode. Miss deadlines. Make emotional mistakes. Men who lose custody usually don't lose it because they are bad fathers. They lose it because they react badly when accused. I didn't react at all. While Claire posted curated photos online, brunches, charity events, smiling captions about new beginnings, I kept my schedule unchanged. Picked Evan and Lily up from school when allowed. Attended every permitted event. Documented every denied request. Meanwhile, the Whitmans made their second mistake. They pushed too fast. The envelope started working its way through the system. Kellerman requested a private meeting with Mary Ann. Not a deposition. Not a motion. A conversation. That told me everything. Lawyers don't ask for quiet meetings unless something scares them. 2 days later, the regulatory inquiry into my company stalled. No follow-up requests. No interviews scheduled. Clients stopped receiving concerned phone calls. Someone had made a call. Someone else had realized who they were actually dealing with. Claire finally called me that night. Her voice wasn't confident anymore. Why is my lawyer suddenly asking questions about my parents? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence do the work. What did you give him? She said. Information, I replied. You're trying to intimidate us, she snapped. No, I said. I'm letting the truth speak for itself. She hung up, but the damage was already done. Because once people like the Whitmans realize the spotlight might turn on them, they don't ask if there's a problem. They ask how much time they have left. And that's when they start making mistakes you can prove. By the end of that week, Claire's case was no longer about custody. It was about containment. And she knew it. The part where her version of reality stopped being the only one anyone believed. When you deal with families like the Whitmans long enough, you learn a pattern. They don't fear truth. They fear exposure. Truth can be managed. Exposure can't. Claire grew up believing certain doors never opened unless a family allowed it. Judges returned calls. Boards listened. Regulators softened language. Problems were handled quietly. That confidence was the first thing to crack. 3 days after her call, Marianne received a formal request. Not from Claire's lawyer, from a federal compliance office. They wanted clarification on a charitable trust linked to the Whitman Family Foundation. Specifically, how funds moved between donor accounts and private holding entities over the last 12 years. That request didn't come from me. It came from someone who'd opened the envelope and realized they had a professional obligation to ask questions. That's how real consequences begin, not with accusations, with paperwork. Here's what Claire never understood about the envelope. It wasn't dramatic. No threats, no letters, just timelines, transactions aligned with appointments, board votes followed by donations, legal outcomes that coincidentally benefited the same names again and again. Most people skim. Professionals don't. And once a professional sees a pattern, they can't unsee it. Claire showed up at my office unannounced the following Monday. Security called first. She says it's urgent. My assistant said, she won't leave. I told them to let her up. She walked in like she still owned the place. Same posture, same perfume, same entitlement, but her hands were shaking. You went too far, she said without sitting down. No, I replied, I went exactly far enough. She laughed, but it came out wrong. You think you can destroy my parents because you're angry, she said. You think anyone's going to believe you over them. I leaned back in my chair. I don't need anyone to believe me, I said. I just need them to read. That's when her confidence collapsed, because she already knew someone had. She sat down slowly. What do you want? She asked. That question always comes eventually. Not what did you do? Not why. What do you want? I want my children, I said, and I want this divorce handled honestly. She scoffed. You think this makes you look good, she said. Spying? Digging into my family. I didn't spy, I said. I documented. She stood up again, angry now. You can't prove intent. I don't need to, I replied. Intent doesn't matter when the records speak for themselves. That's the thing about financial trails. They don't forget. They don't soften language. They don't care who your parents are. That afternoon, Claire's filings changed. No more supervised visitation. No more language about instability. Requests softened. Percentages adjusted. It wasn't a concession. It was retreat. And retreats only happen when someone realizes the terrain is hostile. The custody evaluator requested additional interviews. Not just with me, with Claire's parents. That had never been part of the plan. I watched Claire's strategy unravel without lifting a finger. Her entire case depended on authority figures nodding along to a familiar story. Ambitious husband, neglected family, concerned wife. But authority figures get cautious when their own inboxes start filling with questions. 2 weeks later, the first real fracture appeared. Claire's mother stepped down from the board of a regional nonprofit she'd chaired for over a decade. Official reason, personal matters. Unofficial reason, donors were asking where their money actually went. That resignation never would have happened before. But now, it had to, because attention had shifted. Claire called that night. No anger this time, just exhaustion. You planned this, she said quietly. I prepared, I replied. That's not the same thing, she said. It is when someone else fires first. I said. She didn't argue. Instead, she asked something she never had before. If I back off, she said, will you stop? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple. This stopped being about us the moment she tried to erase me as a father. You should talk to your lawyer, I said, and tell him to be careful what he files next. She hung up. That was the night I reviewed the last folder in my system, the one I'd hoped I'd never need, because inside it wasn't just financial records. It was sworn statements, archive correspondence, old regulatory complaints that were quietly closed without resolution, things that didn't disappear. They just waited. Claire thought she was negotiating a divorce. She didn't realize she was standing between her family and a spotlight that had been warming up for years, right in the middle of a courtroom she thought she controlled. Family courtrooms are designed to feel small. Low ceilings, muted colors, benches that keep everyone close enough to hear each other breathe. It's intentional. Emotion fills the space faster that way. Claire had always been comfortable in rooms like this. Judges recognized her last name. Attorneys greeted her parents with familiarity. Clark smiled. That morning, she walked in confident again. She thought the worst was over. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. By 9:12, the energy had shifted. Two people entered the courtroom who weren't on either of our schedules. Both wore conservative suits. Neither spoke to Claire. They sat in the second row. Marianne noticed them immediately. So did the judge. That's the thing about professionals. They recognize other professionals. The judge began with routine remarks. Custody, temporary orders, procedural boundaries. Claire's lawyer spoke first. Measured tone, concerned language. He painted a picture of a devoted mother protecting her children from a distant, controlling father whose professional obsession with surveillance raised legitimate questions. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't need to. He expected the room to nod. It didn't. When it was Marianne's tone, she didn't stand right away. She waited until the judge looked at her directly. Your Honor, she said calmly, before we discuss custody, I need to address the foundation of the petitioner's claims. She placed a single document on the bench, not a stack, one page. That alone changed the temperature. This is a sworn financial disclosure, Marianne continued, submitted by Mrs. Mercer. It contains omissions. The judge frowned. Omissions? He asked. Yes, Marianne said. Material ones. Claire's lawyer shifted in his chair. Marianne didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She asked questions. Questions that had answers attached. Why were 3 trust-linked accounts excluded? Why were loans secured against marital assets not disclosed? Why were charitable transfers routed through private holding entities? Each question landed. Each one had documentation behind it. The judge stopped taking notes. That's when I saw it. The nodding had stopped. Claire leaned over and whispered to her lawyer. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood and asked for a brief recess. The judge declined. This court prefers transparency, he said. That was the moment Claire's posture changed. Because transparency is dangerous when you've been operating in shadows. Then Marianne addressed custody. She didn't argue. She reframed. Your Honor, She said, "The petitioner's claims about my client's absence are contradicted by her own records." She submitted calendars, school logs, denied visitation requests. A pattern emerged, not of neglect, of obstruction. The two observers in the second row stood. They identified themselves quietly, not to the room, to the judge. The courtroom didn't hear their names, but it didn't need to. The judge's reaction said enough. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and changed course. Temporary custody was awarded to me. Not shared, not supervised. Me. Claire didn't cry. She went very still. Her entire strategy had depended on momentum. Authority agreeing with authority, but authority had just turned inward. As we exited the courtroom, Claire finally spoke. "This isn't over," she said. She believed that, because she still thought this was a divorce. She hadn't yet understood what else had been set in motion. The envelope had done its job, but the fallout was just beginning. The Whitman name stopped opening doors. It started closing them. Power doesn't collapse all at once. It recedes. Phone calls stop getting returned. Meetings get postponed. People who used to greet you by name suddenly need to check their schedule. The Whitmans noticed a change before Claire did. Her father was the first to feel it. 2 days after the custody hearing, Richard Whitman's weekly breakfast meeting at the Union League was canceled. No explanation, just a polite note from the club manager saying the room was no longer available on Tuesdays. That meeting had been on the calendar for 11 years. Her mother noticed next. The foundation's annual gala, scheduled, sponsored, announced, was quietly removed from the venue's website. When she called to ask why, the answer was vague. Internal review. Compliance questions. Temporary pause. Nothing accusatory. Nothing concrete. Just hesitation. That's how influence dies. Claire still thought she could fix it. She showed up at my house unannounced that Friday evening, just after I put Evan and Lily to bed. She stood on the porch like a stranger. "I talked to my parents," she said. "They are handling it." I didn't invite her in. Handling what? I asked. She hesitated. "Whatever you started." That sentence told me everything. She still didn't know the full scope. Here's what she hadn't seen yet. 3 regulatory bodies had opened parallel reviews, not investigations. Reviews. That distinction matters. Reviews don't accuse. They verify. And verification is brutal when records don't align. One of the observers from the courtroom worked for an ethics compliance office. Another specialized in nonprofit financial oversight. Neither cared about my divorce. They cared about patterns, and the Whitmans had left them years of material to work through. Clay's lawyer called Marianne the following Monday. Not aggressive this time. Careful. He wanted to discuss settlement options. Generous ones. House split evenly. Business untouched. Joint custody with expanded access for me. It was a complete reversal. Marianne listened without interrupting. Then she said one sentence. "My client isn't negotiating from fear." Silence followed. That afternoon, Claire's mother resigned from the foundation's board. No announcement, no farewell event, just a line added to a quarterly report. Her father's name disappeared from 2 advisory committees by the end of the week. Still no scandal, no headlines, just absence. Claire called again that night. She sounded smaller. "They're asking questions I don't have answers to," she said. Then you should tell the truth, I replied. She laughed weakly. You don't understand, she said. In my family, the truth is flexible. That's a problem, I said. It isn't anymore. She didn't argue. She asked something else instead. If I agree to your terms, she said, will this stop spreading? I chose my words carefully. This stops when everyone stops lying. She went quiet. The final blow came from a place none of them expected. A mid-level auditor requested archive files tied to a decade-old zoning approval involving a Whitman-backed development. Routine request. Standard procedure. The file had been misplaced. That was a mistake, because missing files don't disappear. They get flagged, and flags attract attention. By the end of the month, the Whitmans weren't returning Claire's calls. They were busy meeting with attorneys, consultants, crisis advisors, people who specialize in damage control. Claire was no longer the priority. She was collateral. She signed the revised custody agreement without argument. Primary physical custody stayed with me. Her visitation rights restored, but limited. No appeals. No delays. As she handed the pen back to Marianne, her hand shook. I never thought it would end like this, she said. I didn't respond, because this wasn't the end. It was a moment before consequences become permanent. One question finally got asked out loud, not in a courtroom, but in public. A question the Whitmans had spent decades making sure no one ever asked. The first article didn't mention my name. It didn't mention Claire's either. It appeared in the business section of a regional paper on a Wednesday morning, buried below headlines about interest rates and zoning approvals. The title was careful. Review raises governance questions at prominent family foundation. No accusations, no conclusions, just questions. That's how credibility erodes, quietly in print where words don't need volume to carry weight. The article referenced discrepancies, unclear fund allocations, board overlap with regulatory approvals, delayed disclosures. Nothing new to anyone who'd read the envelope. But this time, the questions weren't private. They were public, and public questions demand answers. Claire called me the moment it went live. Her voice was shaking. They're using your information, she said. They're using facts, I replied. She started crying then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of crying that comes when denial finally collapses. My father says this will blow over, she whispered. He's wrong, I said. She knew it. What followed wasn't chaos. It was process. Audits expanded. Reviews escalated. Subpoenas replaced requests. One agency opened a file, then another. Each one acted independently. That's the part people don't understand. No one needs to coordinate when the truth lines up on its own. Clay's parents hired a crisis management firm. Press statements were drafted. Language softened. Responsibility diffused. They used words like oversight, administrative lapse, miscommunication. They never used the word intent, because intent is what turns mistakes into crimes. The next court date came and went without drama. Custody was finalized. I was awarded primary decision-making authority. Claire sat quietly beside her attorney, no longer arguing, no longer performing. She looked like someone who'd aged years and weeks. As we left the courtroom, she stopped me. I didn't know, she said. That wasn't true. She just hadn't known how deep it went. 2 weeks later, the foundation announced it was suspending operations pending review. Donors demanded refunds. Partners distanced themselves. Board members resigned to focus on personal matters. The Whitman name, once printed on banners and invitations, disappeared. Not replaced. Just gone. Claire moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side. Sold most of what she owned to cover legal fees. The lifestyle she'd assumed was permanent evaporated without a single dramatic moment. Just bills. And silence. Evan and Lily adjusted faster than anyone expected. Kids do that when the environment finally stabilizes. We built routines. Homework at the kitchen table. Saturday mornings at the park. Evenings without tension. For the first time in years, my home was quiet in a good way. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty, if I regret not stopping sooner. The answer is simple. I didn't destroy anything. I stopped protecting lies. There's a difference. The last call I received from Claire came late one night. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't threaten. She just said, "I wish I'd understood what you were capable of." I paused. "So do I," I said, and for the first time, that was true. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about what happens after the truth finishes doing its work. After months of quiet fallout, the Whitman name had stopped opening doors. It started closing them. Foundations dissolved, board positions vacated. Donors redirected their funds. Claire's parents no longer had influence. They were ghosts in rooms they once dominated. The custody agreement was finalized. Evan and Lily lived with me full-time. School schedules, bedtime routines, weekend activities, everything now ran without tension, without fear, without manipulation. For the first time in 15 years, my house felt like home instead of battlefield. Claire tried to rebuild her life. Slowly, quietly. The apartment she rented was modest. She sold her car. She sold designer clothes. Legal fees had consumed most of her savings. Every move she made reminded her of how far she had fallen. Her reputation in Chicago's social circles evaporated almost overnight. Friends stopped calling. Business contacts distanced themselves. People who had once smiled politely in her presence now pretended not to see her. The life she had assumed was permanent was gone. She called once, 6 months after everything ended. "Daniel," she said, voice quieter than I expected. I'm sorry." I listened, calmly. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything about revenge, because there wasn't any left to take. Mercer Industrial Logistics grew. Carefully, slowly. My employees, my clients, my children, they were my priority. We expanded into new markets. Revenue increased, not because I wanted to prove something, because I now had time and focus to do it right. Evan joined Little League. Lily started piano lessons. I coached. I attended every recital, every game, every event I could. The life I almost lost became the life I actually had. And this time, I was present for it. Claire eventually moved out of Chicago. She found work in real estate, making a fraction of what she'd made before. She had no influence, no power, no ability to manipulate the system. She was left only with herself. The Whitman family, too, suffered quietly. Their foundation was under investigation for years. Fines issued, reputations permanently damaged. Lawsuits followed. The public never needed a scandal. The truth alone was enough. I never celebrated their losses. I only maintained my vigilance. because that is what protection looks like. Not anger, not revenge, but patience, preparation, and understanding that the right information in the right hands changes everything. Evan and Lily never saw the war their mother had waged. They only saw a father who was present, who loved them, who taught them, through example, that integrity matters, that preparation matters, that choices have consequences. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret giving that envelope to Kellerman. No, it wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. The truth restored my family. The truth protected my children. The truth exposed what had been hidden for far too long. And when you live your life that way, when you act with foresight, patience, and intelligence, sometimes the world corrects itself. Evan and Lily laugh in the backyard as I watch. Saturday mornings, chocolate chip pancakes, homework sessions, bedtime stories. The house smells like home again. Warm, safe, full of life. And for the first time in 15 years, I know something that Claire will never understand. Winning isn't about revenge. It's about preserving what truly matters. Sometimes the good guys do win. Sometimes patience, preparation, and truth are stronger than greed, arrogance, and lies. And sometimes truth alone is enough.